So we have this very interesting interaction between these languages. We think that the text probably originally is a Greek text because to honor the pharaoh as a...
For over 2 centuries, the Rosetta Stone has been treated as the key to unlocking ancient Egypt, a solved mystery in history books. But when Grok AI-assisted analysis highlights patterns beyond traditional interpretation, it does not reveal new facts, but instead suggests alternative ways the artifact can be understood. In doing so, it points to subtle inconsistencies and interpretive gaps within its story. What once felt complete now appears more open-ended, as if deeper layers of meaning remain. So the question arises, what if we've never truly understood it at all? Let's go deeper. The stone that was never what it seemed. The Rosetta Stone was never just a simple relic. It is a heavily misunderstood artifact whose true identity was obscured for generations. When it was first documented, after being discovered in Rosetta in 1799 and later transferred to British control, it was casually described as a dark basalt slab engraved with 3 distinct scripts. That early assumption shaped decades of misunderstanding, leading scholars to overlook crucial physical details embedded in its surface. Once it arrived in London, the stone's appearance was intentionally altered. White chalk was rubbed into its inscriptions to make the carved text more readable, and a protective coating of wax was applied to preserve it from constant handling. Over time, this treatment darkened its appearance so significantly that it was widely misidentified as black basalt rather than its true composition. This misclassification persisted for years, influencing early interpretations of its origin. It wasn't until 1999, when the stone underwent careful cleaning, that its original identity resurfaced. The artificial coatings were removed, revealing a natural dark gray granodiorite surface with subtle crystalline reflections. A faint pink vein running through one corner confirmed geological ties to the Aswan region, specifically Gebel Tingar near the Nile. This discovery reshaped assumptions about its geological origin and confirmed it had been quarried locally in Egypt, not imported as previously debated. Physically, the stone is massive, standing just under 4 feet tall, over 2 feet wide, and weighing approximately 760 kilograms. Its sheer weight alone suggests the immense effort required to transport it across continents in antiquity and later during colonial extraction. But its true significance lies not in its size, but in the layered inscriptions carved into its surface. 3 scripts occupy the slab: hieroglyphic at the top, Demotic in the middle, and ancient Greek at the bottom. Each represents a different linguistic and cultural layer of Ptolemaic Egypt. Yet even this structured multilingual design raises questions. Why encode the same decree 3 different ways on a single monument, unless communication itself was being carefully controlled? The stone we see today is also incomplete. It is a broken fragment of a larger stele that has never been fully recovered. Missing sections likely contained additional inscriptions and possibly symbolic artwork, including royal imagery and divine iconography typical of Ptolemaic monuments. Compared with similar artifacts like the Canopus stele, scholars estimate that at least a foot of hieroglyphic text is missing, along with decorative elements at the top. This raises a deeper question that one AI-assisted interpretation highlights as worth reconsidering. If so much of the stone is missing or altered, how much of its original message has truly survived? And what has been permanently lost to time, politics, or interpretation? That uncertainty is where the real mystery begins. The decree that exposed a fragile empire. At the heart of the Rosetta Stone lies a decree issued during the reign of Ptolemy V, a ruler whose authority was anything but stable. The inscription was not a royal proclamation in the traditional sense, but a formal declaration created by Egyptian priests in Memphis, designed to legitimize a young and politically vulnerable king. It elevated him to divine status, binding religious authority to political survival in a period of deep instability. The text carefully records ceremonial dates, including both Egyptian and Macedonian calendar systems, placing the decree around 196 BC. Yet inconsistencies immediately appear. Different sections of the inscription reference conflicting coronation dates, some pointing to March, others to November. These contradictions remain unresolved, suggesting either translation errors, political revision, or deliberate manipulation of historical record-keeping. The backdrop of this decree was a collapsing empire. Ptolemy V ascended the throne as a child after the suspected assassination of his parents in a palace conspiracy. Power struggles followed almost immediately, with regents and generals controlling Egypt in his name, while factions battled for dominance. Alexandria experienced repeated upheavals, and an authority shifted between competing political figures before stabilizing under cautious priestly oversight. At the same time, Egypt faced external pressure from rival empires. The Seleucid ruler Antiochus III and Macedonian king Philip V coordinated attacks on Ptolemaic territories, stripping away key regions and weakening Egyptian influence abroad. In the south, long-standing revolts persisted, led by local rulers who resisted centralized control for years. Egypt was not unified. It was fractured, unstable, and constantly under threat. Within this chaos, the decree served a strategic purpose. It declared loyalty to the young king while reinforcing the authority of the priesthood. In exchange for political recognition, the priests were granted religious privileges and ensured their own influence remained intact. The king was praised for managing the Nile floods, distributing grain, and funding temples, acts that symbolized divine favor rather than direct governance. The Rosetta Stone also mandated that the decree be displayed in every temple, written in 3 languages to ensure maximum reach: hieroglyphs for sacred authority, Demotic for local administration, and Greek for the ruling elite. This multilingual approach reveals a deeply divided society, attempting to maintain unity through language control. One speculative computational interpretation introduces an alternative reading. The inconsistencies in the text may not be accidental. They could reflect competing narratives embedded within a single official record, each version serving a different audience, each shaped by political necessity rather than historical truth. If so, the decree is not just a proclamation of power, but a carefully layered construction of conflicting realities designed to stabilize an empire on the edge of collapse. And that raises a disturbing possibility. What if the stone was never meant to tell one truth at all? The discovery that changed everything. The modern discovery of the Rosetta Stone began during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1798, when French scholars accompanied military forces with the mission of documenting ancient civilization. In 1799, soldiers repairing Fort Julien near Rosetta uncovered a dark slab covered in inscriptions. Lieutenant Pierre-François Bouchard quickly recognized its potential significance and alerted French authorities stationed in Egypt. The artifact was transported to Cairo, where scholars at the Institut d'Egypte began studying it intensively. Early examinations confirmed that the stone contained 3 scripts representing the same message. Copies were made using innovative printing techniques, allowing European academics to analyze the inscriptions without physically accessing the original artifact. These reproductions quickly spread across scholarly networks in Europe. By 1801, however, the political situation shifted. British forces moved into Egypt, and after a series of military confrontations, control of the region changed hands. The Rosetta Stone was eventually seized and transferred to Britain, where it remains to this day. Its relocation marked not just a transfer of ownership, but a shift in intellectual dominance over the interpretation of ancient Egyptian language. What followed was a century-long struggle to decode the inscriptions. Scholars gradually unlocked the relationship between the 3 scripts, eventually enabling the translation of hieroglyphs for the first time in modern history. But even as linguistic breakthroughs were achieved, gaps in interpretation remained. Missing fragments, damaged sections, and inconsistent phrasing continued to obscure full understanding. This is where Grok AI introduces a new dimension to the analysis. By scanning high-resolution surface data and comparing linguistic structures across all three scripts simultaneously. It identifies patterns that traditional scholarship often treats separately. These patterns suggest not just translation equivalence, but deliberate structural asymmetry, small but consistent differences in phrasing that may indicate controlled messaging across different linguistic audiences. In other words, the stone may not simply be a translation key. It could be a multi-layered communication system that may have been interpreted differently depending on audience and language. That possibility transforms the Rosetta Stone from a historical breakthrough into something far more unsettling. Instead of being a bridge between languages, it may reflect how communication in ancient societies could vary across language groups and social classes. A single decree, fragmented into multiple interpretations, carefully distributed across a fractured empire. And if this interpretive analysis is taken as a possibility, then the Rosetta Stone is not just a key to the past. It may be a warning about how truth itself can be engineered, divided, and rewritten long before the modern world even existed. The final passage of the Rosetta Stone, from battlefield to British Museum. Menou, now fully in command of the French expedition in Egypt, ordered a withdrawal northward while carrying the Rosetta Stone along with other valuable antiquities. What began as an academic mission had fully transformed into a military retreat under pressure. As British forces advanced, clashes erupted across the region, forcing the French into a continuous fallback toward Alexandria. The city soon became their last stronghold, surrounded and cut off, with the Rosetta Stone trapped inside a collapsing empire's final position. When Menou formally surrendered on August 30th, the war itself effectively ended, but the struggle over knowledge had only just begun. Immediately after the capitulation, tensions flared over the fate of the Egyptian discoveries. The French insisted that the artifacts, including scientific records, maps, manuscripts, and ancient objects, belonged to the Institut d'Egypte and therefore remained under French scholarly ownership. The British, however, saw things differently. Under General John Hely Hutchinson, they refused to lift military pressure until full control of the discoveries was transferred. What followed was not a simple handover, but a tense intellectual standoff. British scholars Edward Daniel Clarke and William Richard Hamilton arrived in Alexandria to inspect what had been collected. Their findings escalated the situation dramatically. They discovered that the French had not fully disclosed the extent of their holdings. Clarke later claimed that significant items were deliberately concealed, suggesting that the scientific mission had been mixed with political protectionism. This discovery shifted the narrative from cooperation to accusation. Hutchinson responded by declaring that all materials now belonged to the British Crown. The French reaction was immediate and hostile. Some scholars and officers threatened to destroy their own findings rather than allow them to be seized, invoking the historical trauma of the burning of the Library of Alexandria as a warning and symbolic reference point. The implication was clear: knowledge itself could be erased if ownership was forcibly imposed. Clarke and Hamilton attempted to de-escalate the situation. They argued that scientific materials should be separated from military spoils, emphasizing their universal value. Hutchinson agreed to limited concessions, allowing some natural history specimens and scientific objects to remain with French researchers. But when Menou attempted to claim the Rosetta Stone as his personal possession, the request was immediately rejected. The stone, unlike other objects, had already become too symbolically important to be treated as negotiable property. After prolonged negotiations, the transfer of all major discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone, was formally embedded into the capitulation of Alexandria. This agreement, signed by British, French, and Ottoman representatives, officially ended the dispute. But even this document did not erase confusion over what had actually occurred. The stone's journey from French control to British possession remained surrounded by conflicting testimonies. Colonel Tompkins Hillgrove Turner later claimed he personally removed the Rosetta Stone from Menou and transported it using a gun carriage, presenting it as a straightforward military acquisition. However, Clark's version of events directly contradicted this. He described a secret encounter in which a French officer discreetly led him, John Cripps, and Hamilton through hidden streets behind Menou's residence. There, concealed under protective coverings among baggage, they found the stone carefully hidden away. According to Clark, the officer feared that the artifact would be lost or destroyed amid the chaos of surrender. Once its location was confirmed, Hutchinson was immediately informed and the stone was placed under British protection. Turner then took responsibility for its transport. It was loaded onto the captured French frigate HMS Egyptienne and sailed to Britain, arriving in Portsmouth in February 1802. From there, it was formally presented to King George III as part of Britain's expanding imperial collection of knowledge and artifacts. Before its permanent placement, the Rosetta Stone was shown to scholars at the Society of Antiquaries of London, where Turner himself was a member. On March 11, 1802, it was publicly presented and discussed. This moment marked a shift in its identity. No longer just a battlefield spoil, it had become a central object of intellectual curiosity. Yet even at this early stage, its meaning was still not fully understood. Only its potential was recognized. What makes this moment even more striking is how uncertain every stage of its journey remains. Different accounts of its transfer do not align perfectly, and no single version fully resolves the contradictions. This inconsistency is not just historical noise. It reflects how contested the artifact already was, even before its inscriptions were fully understood. AI-assisted interpretation highlights this as a key point. The stone's physical movement mirrors the instability of its meaning, and that raises a deeper question. Was the Rosetta Stone ever truly discovered, or was it continuously redefined by whoever controlled it at the time? The legacy of decoding, when language, power, and meaning collided. For centuries, ancient Egyptian writing systems existed as silent symbols cut into stone, disconnected from any living interpretation. After the decline of the Roman Empire, knowledge of hieroglyphs gradually disappeared. By the 4th century AD, the ability to read them had vanished almost entirely, leaving behind inscriptions that no longer had accessible meaning. What once functioned as a full writing system became reduced to mysterious imagery. The final known hieroglyphic inscription at Philae marked the symbolic end of a linguistic tradition that had lasted thousands of years. Shortly afterward, Demotic script also disappeared from use, closing the last remaining bridge to ancient Egyptian literacy. With no continuous transmission of knowledge, the writing system effectively became extinct. To later observers, these inscriptions were not language. They were visual artifacts. This misunderstanding shaped centuries of misinterpretation. Greek and Roman writers saw hieroglyphs as symbolic or decorative rather than linguistic. That perception hardened over time, turning Egyptian writing into an object of speculation. In the 5th century, Horapollo's Hieroglyphica reinforced this misconception by assigning abstract meanings to symbols without understanding their linguistic structure. His work was widely accepted despite being largely incorrect, and it misdirected interpretation for generations. Efforts to recover the meaning of hieroglyphs continued across different cultures. Arab scholars in medieval Egypt, including figures like Dhul Nun al-Misri and Ibn Washia, attempted comparative studies between hieroglyphs and Coptic. In Europe, Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers such as Pierius Valerianus and Athanasius Kircher pursued symbolic interpretations. Kircher famously described hieroglyphs as an unsolvable riddle of the Sphinx, capturing the frustration of centuries of failed attempts. The turning point came in 1799 with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. For the first time, scholars had access to a single artifact containing 3 parallel versions of the same decree in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic scripts. This created a unique opportunity. A known language could potentially unlock unknown ones. Yet despite this advantage, progress was slow because the relationship between the scripts was far more complex than expected. Even the Greek inscription posed difficulties due to administrative phrasing specific to the Ptolemaic period. Early translators struggled with contextual meanings rather than vocabulary alone. Scholars like Stephen Weston produced early translations, but they lacked precision. Meanwhile, copies of the inscription circulated widely in Europe, allowing multiple scholars to engage with the text simultaneously. French and German academics quickly became involved in the effort. Gabriel de la Porte du Theil, Hubert Pascal Amilhon, Richard Porson, and Christian Gottlob Heyne all contributed partial translations or reconstructions. Each attempt improved understanding, but also revealed inconsistencies and gaps. Rather than a simple bilingual key, the stone was proving to be a multi-layered linguistic structure. Attention then shifted to the Demotic script, which had been previously misunderstood. Johann David Åkerblad and Antoine Isaac Silvestre de Sacy made important early breakthroughs by identifying proper names within the text. However, they mistakenly assumed the script functioned as a pure alphabet. In reality, it combined phonetic, symbolic, and ideographic elements, making full interpretation far more complex. Despite these limitations, their work established a critical foundation. It proved that Egyptian scripts were not random symbols, but structured systems that could be partially decoded through comparison. This realization paved the way for Thomas Young's later work, which identified phonetic elements within hieroglyphs and demonstrated connections between the different writing systems. Jean-François Champollion ultimately completed the breakthrough in 1822 by demonstrating that hieroglyphs contained a full phonetic system. His work, confirmed through additional inscriptions such as those at Abu Simbel, established the basis for reading ancient Egyptian language. This discovery transformed Egyptology and restored access to thousands of years of recorded history. However, even after this breakthrough, debate continued over the interpretation of the Rosetta Stone itself. Scholars disagreed on whether the Greek, Demotic, or hieroglyphic version represented the original decree. Some argued for Greek primacy, while others believed the hieroglyphic text held greater religious authority. Still others suggested that all three versions were created simultaneously for different audiences within Egyptian society. This debate revealed a deeper truth about the stone. It was never a single unified message. Instead, it functioned as a layered communication system, shaped by political authority, religious tradition, and administrative necessity. Each version emphasized different aspects of the same decree, reflecting the complexity of governance in Ptolemaic Egypt. Grok AI's interpretation pushes this further, suggesting that these differences may not be incidental. Instead, they may reflect intentional design, structured variations meant to communicate differently depending on language and audience. If true, the Rosetta Stone is not just a translation key, but an early example of controlled multilingual messaging embedded in stone. And that leads to a final unsettling possibility. The Rosetta Stone may not have been built to unify meaning, but to fragment it. The Rosetta Stone is often seen as the key that unlocked ancient Egypt, but its story is far less settled than it appears. Every stage of its journey reveals contradictions, reinterpretations, and missing context. From war and discovery to translation and debate, it has never offered a single, stable meaning, only layers of interpretation shaped by those who studied it. And maybe that's its real legacy. Not that it gave us final answers, but that it shows how history is always being reconstructed. If you enjoyed this analysis, like the video and subscribe for more explorations of history through a different lens.